unfortunately, our horse did not win.
What was your reaction when you saw the RFP for the first time?
I was shocked. I was honestly quite shocked. It was refreshing, it was personable, and it flowed. It had been put together and I won't forget it because it was a slide document, right? It was, I was clicking through and it was covering everything off. And it almost felt like I was going through the slide deck of a TED Talk.
Wow.
That's how it felt like it had been put together, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I actually shared the document with others at Neurospace to just bring them across, hey, this is how it's done. And going through it, it was clear. There were clarifications, the tasks that were required. There was a lot of information that was provided around expectations, in a way controlling the amount of information that was given as well, which is good because if you leave it open, you might get a little bit, you might get a lot, you might get too much, right? Yeah, so I'd say I was shocked, to be honest.
But what did you think of this whole thing?
Yeah, firstly, it was 10 out of 10. And I'm not just saying that, John, because you're here. I told you that I think it was even before we were fully engaged, actually quite early on in the process. I think I reached out to you and said, hey, John, this is amazing. I'm pretty blown away. But I think really bringing the vendor on board with the journey and being quite transparent and clear. Transparency is one thing, but clear, right? Because the clarity was, all you had to do was read the RFP to understand every step and to be essentially fully aligned with the expectations. It was just a very tidy experience.
What's your thought or experience about the anonymous proposal concept?
First of all, this is the first time I've ever experienced that, and the anonymity in the RFP process. And at the beginning, when reading through it, I was a little bit taken back, I'd say, to begin with. But then obviously thinking through it, you start to realize that it's essentially protecting the integrity of the RFP process. And that's really, in my opinion, that's what it does, right? It takes away the opportunity for bias and it really just puts merits against merits. And that's really how it should be done. That's how fair RFP process works well. And from my personal experience, and maybe it's easier for me to say that because we were successful, but I think maybe from the feedback you got from those who weren't, it was really quite nice. You submitted feeling positive, like you actually had a chance, because it took away some of those aspects that I mentioned earlier, which was, hey, I don't usually tender things that I don't have a relationship with. And in this case, that was the situation with this tender. The situation with this tender was I didn't have a relationship and we did tender it. We did submit anyways, because after we received the documentation, it was pretty obvious that we were going to have a very fair evaluation process. And that was mainly because of, I think, the anonymity in the process. So, John, I actually went against what we usually do, because usually we would not tender on projects that have been just put out like that. It was actually quite funny because throughout the beginning of the RFP, it was outlined from the very start. And I told Adam, my project manager, and Pranay, our head of tech, who were interviewed, and I said to them both, you're going to need to do interviews one by one. When one is in the room, the other one can't be. And by the way, you have to have a whiteboard behind you. But it was, again, shocking. I think, to be fair, the descriptive word of this evening is shocking, John. You are a shocking man.
So that was really the experience on the clarification phase. And I think in major projects, what we see, Anton, is it reduces the amount of change orders and contract variations by up to 60% on highly complex projects, because a lot of the plans have been put in place upfront with the vendor.
And I can see the value in it. It made the process for us all the way through to going live to that customer. It was smooth. We didn't hear a thing. We haven't heard a thing. We're in touch with them, of course, for the early hypercare period as well, but it hasn't had a hiccup, which has been fantastic. And I think that's testament to the process, but then also on the client side, having a good team, having the right people there, having that selection and that commitment to bringing on board the right vendor and then launching.